Hello dear chess lovers, it's white to play in this position. Please take a moment and try to find the best move for white. How would you treat this position? What is your goal from this position? Are you playing for a win or a draw? What are your observations? That's also a great position for such goal setting process in calculation. Okay? And once you look deep into this position, please tell me a couple of ideas of how you would treat this position with white in a practical game. What will be your move choice in this position and also the reasons why, okay? The reason I'm making a video about this position, folks, is I find it fascinating that the engine doesn't distinguish between two options that make a draw for white. Engines are oblivious to the difficulty of finding certain lines in chess, right? Imagine that one of these moves is giving us a draw in all the branches, easy draw, and the other move, we need to find maybe 7 or 8 only moves to save the draw for white. Engines don't distinguish that. They both spit out 0, 0, 0, 0 for both of these moves. So I find it fascinating that at this day and age, we don't have such information. You might also call meta information from the engine. Folks, first I will tell you my observations here. Despite the fact that our pawns are advanced on the king side, we are playing for a draw for white. Why? Because the black king is much more active than our king. Okay? And the king's activity is the most important factor in a pawn endgame. Now, how do we save a draw for white in this position, right? Once your goal is to play for a draw, I think there's one option that is very logical for us to save the draw. And yes, you're a great player if you came up with the move g takes h6. Why? Because with the rook pawn, it's impossible for black to win this game. Why? Because in pure pawn endgame, rook pawns are the most difficult to convert and promote. The margin of error for white is so huge in this position. Almost any move draws for white. I can even show you like the line that draws for white that is sort of showing off. I can even move my king all the way to d1 just to show you the margin for draw in a position like that, right? We give up the h-pawn, and yes, we can even wait like this with king d1. I'm showing off, guys, yeah? As long as the king reaches f1, they can never convert the rook pawn. That's a pawn endgame pattern that you should also, of course, know, right? In this position, if you pay close attention, if the king does this, then you just wait, and this pawn is helpless to promote. And if they start rolling their pawn, of course, you just wait like this, right? It's just very, very easy to understand that it's impossible for black to promote the rook pawn. Stalemate. So this pattern should be learned first, of course, when you're building your endgame foundations, right? You should start from the very basic pawn endgames like this. Now, after g takes, I show you the cocky line, but any kind of normal move like king h3 also is sufficient to draw. In this position, you should understand there is no way for the white king to protect the pawn on h5. We have to lose the pawn on h5, and this has to be seen from the first position, and yet because of the rook pawn, we don't lose this position with white. Okay? Now, if we go back to the very first position, folks, in this position, there's also one more move that, according to the engine, saves the draw for white, and that's g6. Now, please be honest with me. Have you come up with the move g6? And did you hand wave? How much analysis did you do before choosing g6? That's my key question. Because g6 is a draw, but there's only a single branch. Now you have to find maybe 5 or 6 only moves, maybe more, only moves to save the draw for white. You're taking much more risk in a practical game when you play g6. Why? Well, the black king is much more active than your king, and you're now on the verge of losing both of your pawns. You have to be so careful of not to lose both of your pawns, because then you're losing, right? So we already can understand after going g6, white has to be extremely careful to save the draw from this position. Now, let's continue and analyze how white can save the draw. Already from this position, folks, there's only a single move that draws for white, and that's the move king g3. I'll come back to it. Why king h4 loses, for example, yeah? King g3, only move. King f5, well, it's already becomes obvious that the king will collect one of those pawns on the king side, correct? Now you have to find the only move king f3 to survive. King g5. As I mentioned, now there's a risk of you losing both of these pawns and losing the game. So you have to find the counter-attacking move king e4 because your king is escorting the pawn first of all, and also you want to invade and capture the pawn on g7. King h4, only move king e6, h5, only move king f7, king g3, and now it transpires that white is queening before black. In fact, even we check in this line, but because of this pawn being so advanced and because of the fact that the king is so far away, black is saving this position, right? For example, queen e8, king g1, and now they will promote to a queen. Well, you can still do some checks, you can ask some questions, but if black is careful, folks, black will save the draw in this position. One final try, you can try king g5 and king g4. Imagine that this king will be on g3 right now, then white will be winning. That's a great endgame pattern to remember as well, but the king is one tempo too short from reaching g3, and here black is saving the draw with this line. It looks like white was pressing in this line, but I disagree because g6 in a practical setting is a very, very difficult move to calculate, and the margin of loss becomes huge. Then this becomes a pure calculation exercise. If you have calculated before playing g6 the entire sequence, right? The entire sequence all the way to the end, then you're successful. But how practical would that be in a practical setting, folks, right? That's my question to you. Would you still go for this line and hoping for the best, right? Or would you still choose g takes h6 and settle for an easy draw where the margin of error is, well, basically huge? You can basically make any move in this position and still draw for white, right? So this is the key question to me. That's why this position is so fascinating, because there's something that cannot be fully captured by the engines about this position. Engine doesn't distinguish between g6 and g takes h6. According to the engine, both options are equally strong for white. And you can fool yourself after the game. Imagine you play the move g6 and the engine doesn't distinguish between g takes h6 and g6. You can confuse yourself, you see, after the game, because you don't have this information on. You had to find maybe 6 or 7 only moves in this line to survive as white, to go for a draw. And as I mentioned, they can look at some trappy lines. For example, here, if you go, instead of king g3, if you go king h4, then you're losing, right? Look at the black king. They are much more active than you. And now this king cannot invade, and you're losing both of these pawns, and black wins. After king g3, king f5, well, if you don't play king f3 in this position, you're still losing, right? In this line, you're still losing because of this. So you have to find king f3. And here, you have to go for a counterattack, right? Nothing else survives for white. And you have to see all this. That's my point, right? You had to be so accurate in those calculations that you're capturing g7, you're queening first, and you're just in time, basically, to save the draw from this position. So, again, going back to this position, folks, what will be your move choice? GH or G6? And how would you treat this position in a practical game? Please give me your feedback on YouTube. One thing that is important here, folks, is that even if you choose to go for this line of going for a counterattack, the problem is this: black can take the draw any moment they like, right? Like, don't fool yourself. This line is not forced. You can tell yourself, hey, what if they fail? I can also win this position. The problem is this: if black wants, after king g3, the only move to survive, black can always go for repetition, right? So that's the problem. That's a practical problem for white in entering this line. Black has a draw in the pocket, and black can also ask some questions in this line and force white to find that only branch that is saving the draw, right? So to my mind, metacognition-wise, black is preferable in a practical setting because white is suffering in all these calculations to find the only branch to survive. Meanwhile, white is a very easy choice in this position with GH and settle for a draw. One problem also for many beginners here is that they perceive this position as better for white. Why? Because, well, the pawns are more advanced and it looks like the king is also more advanced on the king side. In fact, if you, after the reality check, if you just come back to your senses again, you understand the black king is much more active than the white king, and inevitably you will lose one of these pawns on the king side, right? Zugzwang patterns, you have to give way, and black king will collect one of these pawns for sure. So sense of danger should set in, and white should settle for an easy draw. As I mentioned, right, there are so many drawing lines for white here. You can even be cocky and show off. Well, the only requirement here with the rook pawn, as you know, guys, is your king has to reach the f1 square, right? Even if the worst case scenario happens, as long as you reach f1, you're saving the draw in this position, right? Because now you want to do this, and if they want to stop you, their king is getting in the way of the rook pawn. This was a short episode. I sometimes make such shorter content, not to overwhelm you folks. Please give me a like and subscribe if you like this video, and please give me feedback on what you think about this video in terms of human cognition, especially metacognition, and how we are still maybe superior to engines at this day and age. Thank you so much, and bye bye.